Bava Batra Daf Kuf Kav Zayin Amud Bet, establishing paternity, Yakir, Yakirenu La'achirim. We understand an amazing idea from unraveling a Rambam and discovering a Vilna Gaon on the Rambam to give us a sense of the degree to which the halacha values even intuitive knowledge that can't be proven. And this starts to get into the whole area of paternity, and particularly in the age of DNA, something the poskim have to work with. What happens if halachically we believe that a particular individual is the son of a particular man, but the DNA doesn't line up? How much credence do we give to these DNA tests, and to what degree do we require that we see that the halacha works in a different way? That the certainty required by halacha is not just a factual certainty, a scientific certainty. There's another dynamic that goes on here. Let's have a look at it. The Rambam says something quite exceptional, and you'll see as we go through how exceptional it is. Shlosha ne'emanim ala bechor. Question is a child a bechor or not? Twins were born. Which one was born first? There are various different reasons why there might be doubt as to who's the firstborn. Three people are given the authority to declare who is the bechor. The chaya, the midwife, the imo, the mother, the aviv, and the father. Chaya miyad shimam razi yatsa rishon ne'emenet. The chaya is believed, the midwife is believed immediately. If she says, this is the child that came out first, we accept that that's the bechor. She was present, she saw, she assisted in the birth, and she says, this is the firstborn, that's it. Imo kol shivat yemei ha'leida ne'emenet lomar zehu bechor. The mother has 7 days that she's believed. She can still say within 7 days of the birth, this is the one that came out first. After that, the children start changing their appearance, their form. She might be confused. Aviv, what about the father who wasn't even there when the child was born? Lo'olam, 50 years later he can say, this is the bechor. On what basis? Afilu amar ha'av al mi shelo huchzak beno klal, hu beni uvechori. Even if he's talking about a child who nobody even knew was his child to start with. There's a stranger and he says, this is my son and he is in fact my bechor. And the child's already 50 years old. Ne'eman, he's believed. Where does that come from? What gives the father that right? So the midwife and the mother are clear. Their information is based on fact. They were present at the time. It's obvious that we would believe them. But this extended credibility that we give to the father without asking for any evidence, what is that? What is the nature of that credibility? So it's based on the psukim in Kitetse. If a man has 2 wives, one he loves and one he hates, and he has children from the one that he loves and from the one that he hates, and the bechor is from the one that he hates, and when it comes time to give his property to his children, he cannot give preference to the son of the loved wife over the son of the disliked wife. Ki et ha-bechor ben hasnu'a yakir. If the bechor is the son of the disliked wife, so be it. That son has the right to the double inheritance. Latet lo pishnayim bechor she'yematzelo ki hu reshutono lo mishpat ha-bechora. And this posuk is the basis of it all. Ki et ha-bechor ben hasnu'a yakir. He must recognize the son of the disliked wife to give that son the double portion as a bechor. And the question is this word yakir. Why do we even need that word there? It could just say that he's got to give the firstborn the double portion. Says the Targum Yonatan, yakir is in the hif'il form grammatically. That means it's causative. It's not that he must recognize the bechor, but it's arum yat buchra birsanita yehoda lekulo dehu buchra. He must make him recognize to the world. Lahakir doesn't mean to recognize, it means to give recognition to, so that the person is recognized by others. It's an interesting idea of the word lakir, because it is in the Hifil. Where does the Targum Yonatan get it from? Our Gemara. Tanya, we learn in a Braita, Yakir, Yakirenu La'achirim. What does Yakir means? It doesn't mean that he must recognize that this is the son, the Bechor. He must make it clear to the world that this is the Bechor. Mikan Omer Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda learned from that deduction Ne'eman adam lomar ze beni bechor. A person is believed to say, this is my son, the bechor. From that word in the Torah. And the Gemara goes into discuss that this must be talking about a situation where there is a chazaka, the assumption in the world is that he's not the bechor. If a father just, nobody's questioning it, sure, the father can say whatever he wants. But we're talking in a situation where for years, there's another child that has been considered the bechor. And now the father comes and he says, it's actually not right. This is the bechor. It's not Shimon, it's Reuven. And in my legacy, Reuven will get the double portion. Everyone says, but everybody knows Shimon was the bechor. He says, I'm telling you it's not true. Reuven was the bechor. So we believe the father. Why? Because of Yakir. As the Rashbam says, V'afal pi shemachzikin acher b'bechor. Even though somebody else is considered the bechor by society, everybody knows that up till now it's always been assumed that Shimon was the bechor. Comes the father and says, wrong. Reuven is the bechor. He is believed because it says, Ki et ha-bechor ben asnoa yakir. He has the right, the authority, the responsibility to determine who is the bechor and to make that bechor, that firstborn, known to the world. Interesting, in the Rashbam it seems, Afal pi shemachzikim acher b'bechor, that means there's no question about them being his children. Paternity is not the issue. The issue is just sequence. Who was the firstborn? But everybody knows who the children are. That's not the issue. And the Rashbam says that very clearly, as does Tosfos on Daf Kuf Lamed Dalet, that we're not talking about a case where paternity is at issue, unlike the Rambam, who says even if paternity is at issue. Firstly, where does the Rashbam get it from? The Torah Tamima explains where the Rashbam gets it from. And he says, "V'nire li betam hadavar mishum dekach more inyan pasuk zeh." The Rashbam and Tosfos get it from the verse, from the pasuk. Ki et habechor ben asnu'a yakir. We're talking about a man who had two wives. He had children from each of the two wives. The issue is, who is the bechor? Is he going to choose a bechor that isn't the biological bechor, the chronological bechor? Says the Torah, no, you've got to give it to the chronological bechor. V'zekai al pasuk hakodem. This goes on the previous pasuk. Ki tiyena leish shtei nashim v'yaldulo. Harei demefurash b'inyan dahashu beno hu yadua. It's clear that this is the son. We know that he got married to these women, he had children, the society knows the family. The only thing we don't know is who was born first. And he says, I know who was born first. He gives evidence that is the Bechor. But we have no indication from the verses, from the psukim, that if paternity is at stake, the father is believed to establish paternity without any proof. Just to say that is my child, I know that that's my child. No evidence of that from the psukim. That's why the Rashbam and Tosfos learn that we're talking only in a case where the chronology is at issue, who is the firstborn. We are not talking about a case where paternity is the issue. If paternity is the issue, the father would not be believed. But the Rambam says he isn't. The Shulchan Aruch paskins that way too. The Rambam says the father is believed. What about the Rambam? Says the Torah Tamima, V'adat HaRambam v'arot tzarich lomer desfira le'rak al pi hasvara kenu. They actually don't have a source for it. It must just be logic. Since the Torah believed him that he's the Bechor, the Torah also believes that you can give evidence on the paternity. But there's nothing in the verses that would indicate that. And I struggled with this piece of Torah to me. Where's the logic? I understand the Rashbam and the Tosfos, he's beautifully showed that that's in the Psukim. But for the Rambam to come with this big chidush and say, even if paternity is at stake, the father is believed to establish paternity, no DNA tests, no evidence, no documentary evidence, no witnesses, the father just comes and says, this is my son, and that's it. Where does the Rambam get that from? Says the Torah to him, it's logic. What's the logic? I understand that there's a question of paternity. The father is believed to say this is the firstborn. But to establish paternity that way, isn't that a very big jump? So there's a Vilna Gaon that gives us a hint as to what it might be. The Vilna Gaon says, because the Shulchan Aruch quotes the Rambam, and the Vilna Gaon says, Afilu Amar, quoting these words of Amar, even if he says, in such a case, Afilu amar ha'ava mi shelo huchzak beno klal hu b'ni uv'chori hu ne'eman, is believed. And that says the Vilna Gaon, v'zeh shene'emar b'milte to Rabbi Yehuda ze b'ni. It's in the Gemara, says the Vilna Gaon. The Rambam gets it from the wording of the Gemara. Because what does the Gemara say? What does the Brisa? Titania yakir yakirenu la'achem mikan omer Rabbi Yehuda ne'eman adam lomar ze b'ni b'chor. Doesn't say ne'eman adam lomar ze b'chori. Doesn't say, Rabbi Yehuda doesn't say a person's believed to say this is a b'chor. The Rabbi Yehuda clearly says he's believed to say ze b'ni b'chor. This is my son and he's the b'chor. It says the Vilna Gaon. From there you can see, from the words of the Brisa, of Rabbi Yehuda's own words, you can see that it's not restricted to questions of chronology. It includes questions of paternity, that you have that in Rabbi Yehuda. Udalok Rashbam v'Tosfos, and not like the Rashbam and Tosfos, says the Vilna Gaon. Okay, so the Vilna Gaon's given us a source in the Gemara, but where does Rabbi Yehuda see it from? So this I struggled on for many hours. Where does Rabbi Yehuda see in the posuk of Yakir? Mikan Omer Rabbi Yehuda, and it's interesting that the Gemara says that, and Rashi still, Rashbam still says that Yakirenu Lacherim, Rabbi Yehuda Kamalo. This is Rabbi Yehuda starts at the beginning of the Brisa. Yakirenu Lacherim. That's Rabbi Yehuda speaking. Mikan, from here, Rabbi Yehuda learnt. The Brisa goes out to say this is where he gets it from, these words. So clearly the Brisa is trying to help us figure out, where do we get this from? If it's just saying that he's entitled to say it's a Bechor, then the same way as the way the Rashbam learns, then the way the Torah Tamima taught us is very simple. It's from the Psukim. But if we go with the Rambam, Mikan, from these words, Rabbi Yehuda said, Ne'eman Adam Lo Omar, not only Bechor, but Zeh B'ni, that he's believed to say Zeh B'ni. Where does Rabbi Yehuda get that from? And I would suggest that what that's saying here, and we see it implied in the Vilna Gaon saying this is the key, we see it in the words of the Gemara itself, of the Brisa itself. Just understand what this means. The Torah says, Ki et habachor ben asnoa yakir. What does yakir mean? Make him known. Says the Brisa, says Rabbi Yehuda, Yakirenu la'achirim. Why don't we ask him, how do you know? A man comes along and says, this is my bechor. So we say, well, make it known. Tell everybody. Give him a double portion. That's what you're obligated to do. The Ramban on Chumash says it's a mitzvah. Yakir is a mitzvah. You've got to do that. You've got to make it known. Why don't we say to him, how do you know? There's no attempt to actually establish his credibility. That's the nature of Yakir, and that's the Mikan. Hakara, recognition, is an intuitive awareness that isn't based on fact, on scientific proof. Yakir, you recognize somebody. You see somebody in the distance and you say Shalom Aleichem. You see him far away and you say Shalom Aleichem. Shalom Aleichem, Reb Reuven. How are you? How do you know? Are you sure it's Reb Reuven? How do you know? How do you know his name? Maybe it's somebody that you know. So you're makir. We recognize one another. We even use the idea in certain areas of Choshen Mishpat, of recognizing something that belongs to you, something that you're very familiar with. That recognition is an immediate, intuitive response to something that is, it's much more than proof. It's an inner certainty that comes just from hakara. That's what hakara is. So if a man comes along and says, this is my bechor, we don't say to him, how do you know? If the mother says, we know how she knows, she was there. If the midwife says, this is the bechor, we know how she knows, she was there. But the father wasn't there. The father was on a business trip, comes back 3 weeks later. He's got twins. You weren't even there. How do you know this is yours? How do you know it's your son? Okay, people have assumed that maybe, but says the Rambam, even if nobody knows that he's your son, and how do you know that he's the Bechor? That's the very nature of Yakir, says Rabbi Yehuda. Yakir, that word Yakir, we don't say Ne'eman, we say Yakir, that's Hakara. If Hakara works for Bechor, surely Hakara will work just to know that it's a son. To be able to use the intuition of Hakara, to use that intuition of recognition to establish chronology, to say, I know that this son was born before that son. That's one thing, but even more so to say, this is my son. I know my son. This is my son. Even if nobody else realizes, even if we haven't seen each other for many years, you know how many stories there are of people who've reconnected after decades of being separate, and there's an immediate knowledge and awareness and recognition, even though they don't look the same anymore. That's what Hakara is. And that's what the Rambam learns from Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda learns from the Posuk that Yakir is an intuitive knowledge that supersedes factual knowledge in certain situations. In the relationship between a father and son, that intuitive bond supersedes any evidence. And it would be interesting, the poskim I'm sure deal with it a lot, of what happens if DNA counters that. But it's possible that in halacha we'll say we don't go by the DNA. If the father's certain and nobody's challenging it, that's something that we wouldn't necessarily go by DNA. The yakir is in itself something that is so very powerful. It says the Rambam, it's a principle that applies between a father and son, not only in laws of Bechorah, but in relationship altogether, in establishing paternity. And says the Vilna Gaon, that law of the Rambam comes from his understanding of Rabbi Yehuda, and it's Rabbi Yehuda's understanding of the Posuk that Yakir means something much more than simple ne'amanut of an aid, simple ne'amanut of a witness. This is an inner knowledge, an inner certainty. It's a little more like emunah and bitachon. The emunah, our knowledge of Hashem, our trust in Hashem, is not based on fact. It can't be based on fact. That doesn't mean it's lacking. On the contrary, emunah and bitachon is something superior to fact. We are more certain about Hashem's existence than we are about lots of other factual things, because facts get changed and we don't always know all the facts. But that inner knowledge that we know of Hashem, that inner knowledge is called emunah, that inner knowledge is called bitachon. And there is an inner knowledge that is called hakara, the ability to be makir, the ability to recognize something with which you are deeply and spiritually connected with, and to be able to understand and act on that recognition and that awareness.